So I sometimes think of the relationship between happiness and performance in a 2x2 matrix. So you've got happy teams, unhappy teams. You've got successful teams, you've got unsuccessful teams. It's not a happiness problem. It's a business focused problem. And also it's not common because basically happiness drives performance mainly. They do exist. It's something to look out for, but you've probably got 3 or 4 times as many teams that are unhappy and successful that are burning out than you've got slacking teams in your organization.
All right, welcome back to the Better Human Podcast. Today, we have got an awesome guest, Nic Marks. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we were just rapping and shooting, I was going to say shooting the shit, but maybe we should be a little more PG. We were having a conversation before the show. And it's interesting because you're a statistician, right? Like a stats guy, a numbers guy. I could just see Excel charts everywhere, right? And your work has led you into this whole conversation of, happiness and creating the connection between our resources and our productivity and our happiness and corporate and stuff. So let's kick right off with that. I think the world needs a little more happiness. And if we could all end up being a little happier today, amazing. But the first question I want to ask you, Nic, is where did this story all begin for you? How do you go from being a statistician moving into the whole conversation of happiness?
I mean, it's a random walk. I think like lots of people's careers, if it's a career, I was sort of doing what I loved doing in front of me. I mean, I was the really annoying guy at school that was top of math without really trying. and I went to Cambridge to read mathematics and then found out I was not a mathematician because you don't see numbers in mathematics. It's all gets very pure. And I started doing applied statistics, decision making, things like that. And then in my 20s, I trained as a therapist, which sounds really left field. But my mum was a family therapist and I really liked my mum's way of being. And I thought, well, maybe I could learn stuff that way. So, and they were just something I did occasionally. And then there was my main job on stats. And I guess over time I merged them and started thinking about what is quality of life. That's my first publications. And then getting into what we call well-being in the UK, which is very government focused. And as you know, I did a TED talk and that was really on my work with governments about how they measure progress. And then for the last decade, 12 years, I've been doing stuff on work about how you can measure people's experience of work, their happiness, their well-being at work. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Actually, I could totally see the link, right? Therapist, right? Mathematician, stats guy. Wow. It's a cool blend, right? So tell me a little bit about that. So, what contributes to us being happier at work and walk us through this whole concept.
So our happiness is sort of our experience of life. We're never happy all of the time. The US Declaration of Independence says, we've got the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it sort of sets up happiness entirely unintentionally to be the sort of goal you achieve and you get there. But it's not really like that. It's not a beach that you lie on. It's always going up and down. We can have 3 moods in a morning, let alone, when you get to my age, you can have good and bad decades. So life is always moving up and down. Yeah. So, but it's obviously better to be happy than not. In a sense, happiness is a signal that things are going well in the organism. Like when we feel happy, it's carry on, seize the opportunity that's in front of you. When we're unhappy, it's move, do something different. And so at the core, that's what happiness is about. And that's why it becomes really important in work, because if we're feeling good at work, we're going to do good work. If we're feeling miserable, we're going to do miserable work. So it's really playing into that very emotional feel about it. And putting numbers on it, it's not the only way to approach the subject, but I'm a statistician, so it's my contribution. But also, I think numbers is the language of business. So if you want businesses to take something which feels soft and fluffy, intangible like happiness, put numbers on it, and suddenly you can take it seriously. You can see its impact. You can start seeing how it links to important business goals.
Yeah. Is it really the business or the work community that has a responsibility for contributing to people's happiness, or is it like people's lives that they're living, right, becoming, in quotations, happy people, then bring that energy to that community and to that work? I mean, is it a symbiotic relationship? Is the responsibility more on the individual to show up in the community like this and then the business supports it? Or is it the business that needs to create the environment contributes to people's happiness. And I just want to continue with this thought, because we are in a world right now where there's this sort of expectation of, like, whether it's the business or the community, my feelings matter, you must make me happy, you must provide me the things I want, et cetera, et cetera. And, the question really comes down to how much ownership do we really need to take in all of this, and responsibility?
It's an and both situation, isn't it?
Mm.
And, we're shaped by systems more than we probably realize.
Right.
In the sense that, if you go into an unhappy team, it's pretty hard to be happy, because the relationships all around you are tense, stressed. People are stressed. It's quite, they're very contagious emotions. So in that sense, happiness is very social. It's very relational. The biggest driver of happiness is relationships, for certain.
Right.
And, but yeah, so, whether that's personally or professionally. And we'd all have had experiences of good and bad teams, and we're still the same person. So there's definitely something the organization can do, and there's something we can do ourselves. Clearly, we have some responsibility for our own mood too.
Yeah. So walk us through, by the way, and we were chatting about this before, I live in Costa Rica, and Costa Rica has been voted like the happiest people for like the last, I don't know, several years, 5 years, something like that. And you can see it. You can see why, right? Now, getting things done in like a restaurant or a business is like pulling teeth sometimes down here, but people live life to the fullest, right? And there's a lifestyle of this. There's a lifestyle of being physically healthy and active. There's a lifestyle of mental health here, which is really looking after those stress levels and managing that. And one of the things I very much see here is the sunset. People will stop for the sunset every day. It's like a thing here, right? And of course, relationships and stuff are healthy. So, not everyone gets to live in Costa Rica. Weather, environment, all of this stuff sort of is important. What are some of the things that businesses or environments can do to contribute to creating an environment of happiness, or maybe promoting this in individuals as well? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's so much in there. I'm still with the sunset a bit, in the sense that I think part of our own happiness is to sometimes stop and notice something beautiful.
Right.
And coming into the moment. Sunsets are very beautiful. Obviously, if you're on the west coast of Costa Rica, you've got the sunsets, on the east sunrises, but the sunsets are particularly beautiful because it's just slowly moving down and setting, and the light colors changes so beautifully. So it really brings us into the moment. And that's not really relevant for work, except that actually, I think beauty does matter at work. I think designing spaces that have natural light, where people, they're not just drab and gray. And, I don't know if have you seen Barbie yet as the film?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
There's a great scene in the offices where Barbie is obviously pink, and all the colors and beautiful colors layered on top of it. It's beautifully in a cinema. And then they go into this really depressing gray office with cubicles. And I think offices could do more to be, have art in them and beauty and things and that. So that's a sort of a side. It's not really the main driver of happiness. But
right.
As soon as you talk sunsets, I'm going to get excited. And at work, there were really 5 big main drivers of happiness at work, and they are connect, which is relationships. Relationships are the most important thing for our happiness in life and at work. So it's making sure that you've got a good sense of community, belonging, you've got good relationships in your teams, particularly. The second one is be fair, treat people fairly. If people aren't treated fairly, obviously they're not happy. And in fact, injustice tends to make us angry. And anger is a very fast moving emotion. We see it on social media, we see it in the media. Anger is what sort of kind of drives a lot of behavior, and it's particularly fast moving. The third one is to empower people, which is basically at a team level. It's not to, team lead, it's not to micromanage, it's to encourage people to play to their strengths, to shape their own work. The fourth is to challenge, which is a total misunderstanding to think that people would be happy doing nothing. Sometimes it's nice to do nothing as a contrast, but if we do nothing for long, we become very stagnant and bored, and boredom is a real joy killer. And the fifth is to inspire people, which is that the meaning and the purpose of what people do really drives us. So those five big drivers, connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire, are the biggest drivers of people's positive experience, particularly at the team level.
Hmm. You've just described leadership, by the way, right? Powering people, making sure that, right, we're putting things in place to treat things fairly, creating connections. I've said this for a long time, which is like we spend so much time with the people that we work with. We need to put in intention and effort behind those relationships, right? We're social creatures. We live in a herd, and what you're talking a lot about with connection and relationships is, and the village and the community is to feel significant, right? We're seen, right? It's one of the most fundamental things that we need as human beings, is to be seen, right? Is to be important and to be significant. And I also talk a lot about what derails team members, right? Where you got two team members, they get paid the same amount, they're supposed to be doing the same job, and one of them sort of comes in late, one of them works half-assed, one of them does more. And what happens is the one that's doing more becomes, feels that this is unfair, or it's not, or it's injustice, or why am I doing it as much? And therefore there's the outcome. What I listen to you talking a lot about is that if we get all of these things right, the outcome is we end up happy, right? And then we can continue to put these things in place which allow us for the outcome to be happy. It's not like you become happy first and then all of a sudden you go and you do these things. It's a number of these things happening which contribute to our well-being, right? And we live in a world now which is sometimes gray, as you were talking about.
It's sometimes grey. It is sometimes grey. It's very grey here in the UK today, raining. It's very multi-layered, our experience, because of course we bring ourselves to work, and we, as you said earlier, there's some responsibility there too. And I'm a very positive guy, and I smile a lot, and that's that attracts things towards me, but sometimes things I don't want to. And sometimes, positivity can be too much. In fact, if I look at the problems I've got myself into life, it's tending to be too optimistic, too positive about things, overriding negative signals. And really, finding the right balance is ultimately what leads to, happiness at work, but also, other good outcomes at work too. Yeah.
Right. Here's a question. From a stat standpoint, do you see a difference between males and females when it comes down to happiness? And I'll just preface this, because what we see in the mental health crisis today is that, the effect on young men, right, between the ages of 18 to 25, right? When you look at suicide stats, right, 80% of suicide is male. Have you seen differences in stats?
I mean, there are differences. So, okay, the suicide rate is a example. So one of the reasons that men commit suicide more than women is they're more violent. They're more successful actually completing the task. Correct. And women tend to self-harm more. So, so there's different ways that it presents. I'm not quite sure that men have a more difficult mental health experience than women. They definitely commit suicide more. But suicide is a relatively rare event. Right. And it's, it's better measure would be to look at the happiness levels of both populations. And at work, they're relatively similar, the levels, but the drivers are slightly different. So, for example, women will feel that they have better relationships at work, but they feel they're paid less fairly. And those are both drivers of happiness at work. So there's underneath the bonnet, there's quite strong differences. At the surface level, there's not very big differences between them.
Right. What companies are doing really well with this? In your experience and work, like who can you list off to say these companies do it well, and maybe also countries?
Yeah, so doing it well at a company level, some of the big successful businesses that do it well in traditionally, Zoom are a great example. I mean, I know there's a lot going on in the whole tech world at the moment with redundancies, and then and Zoom just made an announcement this week about becoming a bit more hybrid. Actually, the headline was they're ordered back to work. Well, 2 days a week is hybrid, isn't it? And still very flexible. So I don't think that's Zoom ordering them back to work. But I've just forgotten the name of the CEO of Zoom at the moment. But he's a great advocate of happiness at work, and actually was a follower of the late great Tony Hsieh. So Zappos were massively,
correct.
And I knew Tony a bit. I don't know if you ever met him, but I worked with him a bit for 4 or 5 years on some measurement stuff. And, everything about Zappos was really trying to, not look after the employees, but it's in self-interest of the business. I mean, Tony's thing was very much, you can't have happy customers, you don't have happy employees. Right. And they made a lot of effort on that. And if you ever went into their offices, I never knew them when they were in San Francisco, but in Las Vegas, you went in the office, they were quite zany. They were, I mean, for a Brit, they were quite out there.
Right. Well, I know Jen Lim, who was partners with Tony, and her book Happiness. It's called Beyond Happiness. I actually have a copy here.
Yeah.
They were extraordinary when it came down to it, right? And look, I think this is interesting, and I talk to a lot of companies about this, which is, sometimes companies butcher this stuff, right? They corporatize it, right? They're like, we're going to have a happiness scale, and we're going to have a culture scale, and we're going to put all this training and the stuff and the granola and the this and that in the place in order to make everyone happy and stuff. And it becomes this exercise for them, which is check the box, instead of just truly sort of live it and adopt it and just become part of their ethos, right? And then there are organizations that do it very well, but I always push back on organizations to say, is this a check the box exercise for you? Or is this something that's really important? And if it's really important, you're going to see that being demonstrated through the attitudes and the behaviors of the individuals driving this exercise, right?
Yeah.
But again, you know what? I think it's so important is people take responsibility, and they're very intentional on what they can do to create happy lives for themselves, right? Because specifically as organizations and leaders, right, we have a responsibility for guiding and role modeling and parenting and contributing to people being more successful in these areas. But it really comes down to the everyday practice, right? So it's interesting, man. It's a very interesting topic that you're talking about right now, considering the world that we're living in right now. And I love what you're talking about because the world needs it, right? One of the questions I asked you earlier was companies. What about countries, right? Do we have numbers for which are happier countries or places?
We most certainly do. Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned Costa Rica as being one of the happiest places. There's something called the World Happiness Report that comes out every year, comes out on World Happiness Day, which is in March. I think it's the 19th or 18th of March each year. And they release a list of the happiest countries. Now, we can debate the precise wording of the question when I get a real stats nerd about this, but it's the best data we have internationally. So let's just take it at face value. And Finland is top of the index at the moment, followed by other Scandinavian countries. Switzerland gets in there. Costa Rica comes, in the top 15 at least, which, considering its GDP, its geopolitical region, it's not, I mean, Costa Rica's this little haven in the middle there, isn't it? You've got you've got Nicaragua, even Panama is much more corrupt than Costa Rica. It's an interesting little place, Costa Rica. There are some historical reasons for its interest, but if you look at Finland or the Nordic countries, why are they top? Is it that Finns are genuinely happier than, say, Brits or Americans, USA citizens? So what is it? Well, if you look at it, let's think about it splitting into four quartiles of income. So you've got the bottom quartile, you've got the top quartile in the middle too, right? If you look at the top three, so they are very similar to somewhere like the UK or the US. So the sort of median Finn is not particularly happier. It is all driven by the fact they have much better social safety nets for the bottom 25, maybe bottom 50%. But basically, their poor are a lot less unhappy. Whereas the US has much, a bigger income inequality. So does the UK. UK sits between the US and Finland. So that's really what the difference really is going on there at the most. But they have other things. Finland is very homogeneous. It's very white. It's got a lot of space, it doesn't have much immigration, doesn't have much things. So, and there are lots of other things that are going on there. It's relatively rich. I mean, Norway does really well. Norway sits on a lot of North Sea oil. It's very rich as a country. It's not really driven by the innovation of the population. It's driven by oil reserves. So there are things that go on at that level. But Costa Rica is a fantastic example, of a country doing really well, perhaps unexpectedly. And right. Latin America as a whole, the whole of South America does better than we'd expect for GDP per capita. And that is almost exclusively driven by the quality of relationships, by the quality of community, by the quality of participation in society. You know, the best comparator is Central Eastern Europe, former Soviet countries, same levels of GDP per capita, same levels of life expectancy, much lower happiness than Latin America. So really, Latin America is a great example of relationships really mattering for happiness.
Yeah. Well, I noticed it instantly. So we came from Canada, by the way. So it's interesting because Canada, I'm originally from South Africa, right? We grew up in South Africa, relationships, revolving door, barbecue, like they were, you lived in a community, right? People at the house, breaking bread, having drinks, swimming, just hanging out all day. Now we moved to Canada, and I think the weather obviously contributes to this, but everyone sort of goes to their homes, right? So the social factor is a little bit differently there. And we came down during the pandemic, during the lockdown in Canada, which for me, one of the reasons we came down was I looked at my wife, and from a happiness standpoint, I was very unhappy. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle being locked up anymore. I couldn't handle not socializing with people anymore. I couldn't without that connection. And that's what really sort of tipped me over in Canada was when friends and family were like, yeah, we could get together with you, but we could get together outside. And I'm like, it's February. It's minus 40 degrees. What do you want to get outside? Like, this is abnormal. Or like grandma sitting 6-7 feet away, right? And like it was for me, it was the disconnection, and call it the isolation, really. So I looked at my wife and I said, look, we got to get out of here. And she was like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, we just need a working vacation. We just need to go 2-3 months somewhere. We're going to set up shop, going to bring down some of the team members, and we're supposed to go to the West Coast, right? Because I had a network out there. Couldn't pull it off. In the 11th hour, my wife said, let's go to Costa Rica. I said, look, if you can find the house that we need, let's get down here. And I kid you not, within the first 12 hours of being here, this thing just lifted, right? It was like, woof. And the thing that actually really, there were a few moments here where I was like, we're going to live here. One of them was we were invited we had just met a bunch of, call it Ticos, locals, friends. And it was one friend's birthday, who's a friend now. Back then we met them because we were renting this house. And they said, look, it's his birthday. Why don't you come out with us on Saturday? Took the boats out and we went off to this beach, and it was a big sort of, day and friends. And just look at all these people, and everyone is celebrating, and everyone is happy, and everyone is social, and everyone is connected. And I'm looking around, and this is brothers and cousins and friends and like a big family. I'm like, I haven't seen this connection in a long time. That was the first. And then the next week we went out, and it was the same group of people, but just less. And the family was sitting there, and I looked at these guys and I said, you guys have something very special. I said, if you two effers showed up in Canada and the situation was reversed, I promise you, none of us would have invited you out. It's just not part of our culture. Right. But you invited us into your home. You took us in like instantly, and we were welcomed. And it was with that, I was like, this is a major, major, major thing. And it reminded me of my childhood. And that was the next tipping point that got us to stay here. So I appreciate what you're talking about, which is happiness has all these factors in it. But one of the major things is that community, that connection, that relationship, right?
Yeah. And it's also massively important for health. So there's something you might have heard of called the Harvard Aging Study. So it was, I think, about 700 men recruited in the late 1930s and 40s, firstly at Harvard University, then downtown Boston. And it was all men. And they tracked them throughout their whole life. And of course, there's only 5 or 10 of those men still alive today. And what was the biggest predictor of life expectancy? Quality of relationships. Much more than, money, fame, IQ, social status. It was relationships. And we're relational beings. In fact, it is our superpower as a species, is collaboration.
Correct.
We are a collaborative ape.
Right.
It's what we do best. Yeah. It's why we've been such a successful species. We're adaptable. We work together. Now, the size of that group, because obviously we work against each other sometimes as well. But creating sort of your tribes, your sense of community is really, really important. And so, Costa Ricans are very, very sociable. Across the whole of Latin America, they are. Actually, another difference in Costa Rica is there's more gender equality in Costa Rica than most Latin American countries. High literacy rates. So there's a lot. They don't have a standing army, do they?
No army.
Yeah, and that's in Latin America. The army tends to be used against the people. not against your country. It's a form of repression. So there's something very progressive and liberal about Costa Rica. Is slightly protected by the US for historical reasons. So there's not so it's not a total, it's, there's a bit of free riding there, but it's if you want to live in Central America, Costa Rica is definitely one of the best places to live.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't live anywhere else. I mean, as you said, Panama, Nicaragua, Guatemala, like they're not as stable and call it as democratic as Costa Rica. Very peaceful place here, right? Yeah. So back to life expectancy. So what are the countries does Finland and the Norway countries have higher life expectancy versus somewhere like a US or Canada?
Yeah, a little bit higher. There's differences in Nordic countries. So yeah, Norway, I think Norway's probably got the highest life expectancy amongst them. They're very outdoorsy in Norway, and so they're very healthy. There is an expression in Norway, which is there's no one as happy as a Norwegian in Denmark. And the reason is the Danes smoke and drink. And so the Norwegians sort of go to sort of like let the hair down a bit. And Denmark has just as high happiness, but lower levels of life expectancy because they're less healthy. And but they quite enjoy being less healthy. And there are trade-offs here, so but I think probably the highest life expectancy in the world is Japan. Possibly Switzerland, but Japan, and you probably know the blue zone stuff, that there are these zones in the world where they've got a high proportion of people that live beyond 100, and there's one in certainly one in Japan, there's one in Italy. They tend to be the types of places where there's strong community. There is normally a way of living which is outdoors. Which by the sea or in the mountains or growing stuff. There's, and again, relationships and community tends to be what drives it. Some diet too, absolutely. But relationships tend to be the core of it again.
As I'm talking to you, I'm thinking like cities are doomed. Cities can't be happy, right? In the concrete jungle and the traffic and the blah, 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 blah. Like it's before you know it, because everything we're describing in these countries is outdoor living and community and call it, I live in a very small town here, right? Like everyone knows everyone kind of thing. Is that a fair statement for me to make?
Well, there's good and bad. There's good and bad stuff. So, I mean, yes, as a general rule, it's cities are less happy than countryside. So, density of population tends to enter an equation of predicting happiness in a negative way.
Right.
That being said, you go to some countries and some of the communities are exceptionally oppressive. There's a reason why people move out of the villages in India into the cities. It's to escape the caste system, to escape oppression. So, there's always particulars that go on too, and there is, and cities are great if you've got money. They're really bad if you're poor, right. So if you've got money, you can buy your way out of some of the nuisances of cities. You can buy a quieter apartment. You can buy, you can not be on a road for air pollution and things like that. But, and you can access the arts and restaurants and whatever that if you haven't got money, you can't do. So London is the least happy region in the Britain. I'm very aware of that. And that always takes people by surprise, but it's because it's got poverty. It's got huge inequalities on its doorstep. Right. If you've got money and you can live in central London in a great apartment, fine. But most people don't.
Right. But the weather in London is also quite great. Right. I mean, when you were talking about the Barbie movie, I was thinking about the remember the classic movie Pleasantville, right? Where it was all gray and then they went and everything became color, right? So, when you look at London, Vancouver is the same way, which is it could be quite gray and rainy, right? So, obviously this has an effect.
Absolutely. Us Brits are obsessed with the weather because it's changeable. Yeah. And so if the sun comes out, weekly happiness in the UK increases. That's absolutely clear. It's an effect. It's not the biggest effect, but it's an effect. Yeah. And actually there's this brilliant study on productivity at work, which is linked to the weather. And the reason it's brilliant is it proves a causal link from happiness to productivity. So it's it's in call centers across the UK. It's with our biggest telecoms company, BT, British Telecom. And they looked at, I think, 1,700 call operators. And they asked them every week, how happy were you this week? Unhappy to happy, right? 5. And then they could look at their sales figures because call operators are really monitors on their productivity. So they could look at it and they could show that the happy operators sold, I think it was 13% more in a week, right? Great. It doesn't actually say why, but but they were, right? And then what they did was, because the call centers are distributed across the UK, they could look to see whether the weather made a different impact, because they could look at the weather forecasts from the local stations. And basically, they showed that the weather made call operators happier, which made them sell more. So there was that can't go the other way, because you can sell more and be happier, but you can't be happy and make the sunshine. You don't have that power. So it's the first study that really showed that. And that would probably only work in Britain, because in India, where the sun shines every day, it becomes oppressive, and you want, so it's a particular thing. It's a particular thing about us. But yeah, I mean, today's grey, and we're having a very grey July, August. June was beautiful, and happiness levels were higher in June than they are in July and August. Yeah.
Maybe we should have done this interview a couple months ago when it was sunnier, huh? Got two sad, unhappy guys. No,
I'm always sunny.
Right. And I was going to ask that research or that report came out on an outbound call center, not an inbound, because inbound is when you're taking customer service calls and being abused all day, versus outbound is like you're trying to call and sell, right? Or
so it was inbound calls, 90% inbound calls, but most of them were things like order taking and renewal contracts, right? But you're quite right. Then there's the more complex renegotiation calls, okay? Often with, as they put it in the paper, disgruntled customers, the hardest type, okay? Yeah. That was where the biggest impact of happiness was, with the disgruntled ones. Because if you're just taking an order, it doesn't really matter whether you're cheery or not, right? But if you're taking a disgruntled customer, you've actually got to negotiate with them. You've got to actually collaborate with the customer to find a new solution. Right. So actually, the more difficult the situation, the more complex the situation, the more off script it is, the more important happiness is.
Right. I agree. I totally agree. And this goes to the customer on the other end of the phone, which is, if you're a little happy and you treat them nicely, you just might get the other end on the phone, someone also being happy and being able to be more productive and effective in their role of helping you, closing, serving, right? Whatever it might be.
I get highly manipulative in public service things, where I will ask the wait staff their name and something like that. And when I come back, I'll go, "Oh, hi, Greg, can you get in? I know you get better service."
Right. It's true. Life is easy if you smile. That's what you said. Smiles are infectious or infectious. They draw people in, and if you be nice and you be happy, people will be nice and happy, and it becomes a symbiotic relationship. And before you know it, you're helping my happiness factor, and I'm helping your happiness factor, and we're just a happy world. Yeah. That being said, we have to work towards this, and I'm sure you agree. We're living in times right now which are scary and feared, and or there's a lot of fear out there, and coming off a couple years which was quite fracturing. So there's a lot of exercise to it, and I love what you're talking about, which is you're creating that connection, that link between an organizational success and the employee's happy or the team member's happiness, right? And it's we've all got to do more in this world, right? And as businesses, we have a responsibility for this stuff. It's cool. I love it.
I mean, it's enlightened self-interest in lots of ways, because you can only drive performance for too long. So I sometimes think of the relationship between, this is at a team level, between happiness and performance in a 2x2 matrix. So you've got happy teams, unhappy teams, you've got successful teams, you've got unsuccessful teams. And you've got 4 quadrants in that 2x2 matrix. 2 are very familiar. So top right are great teams, happy and successful. Bottom left, miserable teams, unhappy and unsuccessful. They're not doing anything good. But then you've got the 2 slightly novel quadrants. Yeah. So you've got bottom right, where they're unhappy and successful. They're burning out. They are going to be stressed. They're not going to last. They're not going to be sustainable as teams. Top left, you've got the one that all leaders are frightened of, which is slacking teams, that basically people would be happy and not work. And I think this is the fear of senior leaders when you start talking about that. So that's an interesting quadrant to tackle head on, because it's not a happiness problem. It's a business focus problem. And and also it's not common, because basically happiness drives performance mainly. They do exist. It's something to look out for, but you probably got 3 or 4 times as many teams that are unhappy and successful that are burning out than you've got slacking teams in your organization.
I agree. Do you see a difference in generations from a happiness scale factor?
I mean, yeah, typically you have a U-shape relationship with happiness. And so basically the least happy decade is the 40s. Mid-30s up to the 50s.
Because all of a sudden life gets serious and it takes 2 or 3 days to bounce back from something and everything starts to hurt. And
well, you get this sort of mixture of like in your 40s, late 30s, some of your dreams that you had when you were young are not there. You've also got probably young children. You've probably got high debt. You might even have elderly parents that you're looking after. Life becomes a little more hard, and then you come out, so you get into your 50s like me, your kids are leaving home, you might have remarried, which I've done. I don't mean that's a positive necessarily, but sometimes people are you're an active agent in your happiness. So if we're unhappy in periods of our life, we change. But I mean, I think you should change anyway. I don't mean partners necessarily, but I mean as in, if you're unhappy at work, you should work out either to get a new job or to renegotiate or find a new role, because that's a serious thing. If you're unhappy, it's an important part of your life work.
Right. I love what you just said there, which is take action and take responsibility. Right. Yeah. If you want to do more, if you want to change things, if you want to adjust, there's a lot of responsibility to communicate that and express it. Right. Cool.
Yeah, and it's not easy because we're resistant to change. In that we'll put up with some pretty miserable things to avoid the risk of change.
Right. But, or avoid the confrontation and the conflict and the conversation. Right.
Yeah, because it was very dangerous in our old, in our evolutionary past to be thrown out of your kinship group was serious consequences. It was not easy to live on your own. So of course we put up with shit to basically stay in the group. And that's an old evolutionary signal. If you leave your job, you're not going to starve tomorrow. You might starve if you don't find another one in a couple of months. Depends what your situation is. And it's easier if you're wealthy or you've got some stock but it's less risky. You're not going to get beaten up by a chimp troop, which we would have done if we left. A single human in the past would not last long.
Yeah. Well, quick story about a monkey troop. So there was a monkey troop that used to, it still lives in the development that we're here. And there was this one monkey, we named him Bongo. And Bongo used to be the alpha. And what happens with these howler monkeys is when the next alpha grows up, they take on the big alpha, they fight them, and they kick him out the group. I kid you not, this monkey Bongo for a year literally lived with us, right? Was always with us, was like, we became his new troop, right? And we would watch him sort of walk alongside while the whole troop was in the trees. This monkey was on the ground. And it was very interesting to watch because it was like this entire social experiment of like getting kicked out of the troop, right? And how do you survive and stuff. So sad story. He's not around anymore, Bongo. We don't know where he went. We think he's on his way.
He's gone to the big tree in the sky, but I mean, I don't know much about howler monkeys particularly, but I mean, presumably they groom each other, do they?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And that is their way of sort of social bonding, monkeys. And so chimps do it a lot. And we still have that left over in us, which is that it's very nice to be stroked on your back. And that's a very groomy thing. And there's this amazing thing, which is that at the bottom of every hair follicle is a T receptor that if you pass it at exactly 2 centimeters per second, it releases endorphins, which is very pleasurable. So if you go too fast with your stroke, you don't get it. If you go too slow, you don't. It's only at 2 centimeters per second. And of course, it also has to be a welcome stroke, in the sense that we obviously limit access to our bodies, so a stranger will shake the hand, a friend will hug, someone we're intimate with will have access to other parts of our body that other people don't. And that is entirely appropriate. But it's really fascinating when I read this thing about 2 centimeters a second, because it's like we instinctively know that. You see a mother with a child, she's stroking its head.
Yeah.
It's an instinct, but it's releasing endorphins.
Yeah. I think about like every time I greet my daughter each morning, right? First thing, hand on the head and how you doing, sweetheart? And petting and stroking the hair and have a great day. Yeah, it's true. It's very true. It's unconscious, but it's true. Cool. Listen, you're writing a book. If
Yeah.
the audience, I know it's not out officially, but why don't we tell the audience a little bit about sort of what the exercise and the effort and the working title of the book is? And then if the audience wants to get in touch with you and find out more about your work, maybe find out more about some of the stats that you've looked at, how can they do that?
Yeah. So the working title of the book is Happiness is a Serious Business. And how basically how businesses can build happy, successful teams, those great teams I talked about. So, and, I'm going to talk about stuff like chimps grooming each other and what happiness is, and really why happiness is a good, bad signal that, when things are going well, we're happy when they aren't, and how organizations can measure that. I'm a statistician at the end. So that's the premise of the book. I'm approaching the end of the first full draft. I mean, I've rewritten the first 4 chapters 5 times already. I've decided. Have you written a book?
I have, and I'm in the midst of writing my second one. So I appreciate what you just said. I've rewritten this one 4 or 5 times. I'm like, I know the pain.
Yeah, it's like I've decided it's quite easy to write an okay book. I think it's quite hard to write a good book. Of course, I want to write a great book, but I mean, my ambitions would be for it to be an airport book. But, I'll have to see whether I pull that off. But it'd be great to, have people picking out, reading it on a 2-hour, 3-hour flight. That's what I'd like it to be. So it is a process of rewriting and also a lot of thinking. Like, I don't know how you are, but I have ideas and I can do talks and workshops and I can play with them. But when you write them down, you have to really commit to them and really know. Yeah. So it's been a good process. So the main way to find me in between now is LinkedIn. It's the only social media I can bear, really. I'm not very good on
I didn't find you on Instagram, by the way. I was like, where's this? Actually, you are on Instagram, but I think you're barely active.
I'm barely active in anything except for LinkedIn. And actually, I need to get more into it. I'm very old. It's all come after me, and it's like any technology that comes after you is always quite hard for you to
Yeah. Well, you look pretty happy in your LinkedIn picture. I got you. We're first contacts in LinkedIn.
Yeah. So
all right, cool. So LinkedIn, which is Nic Marks, NIC, last name MARKS.
Yeah, I don't spell my Nick with a K. It's left over from school. There were 2 of my year Nicks. We both had bad handwriting, so I said I'll drop the K. And he was supposed to pick it up, put it at the beginning of his name, became KNIK. But his lasted 1 week, and here I am, 50 years later, still with mine.
That's awesome. And your website? What's your website that people can?
So the business website is FridayPulse.com. So that's my business, because on Fridays we take the pulse of the organization, and then I have a personal website which is a bit static, which is nicmarks.org. Someone had .com and wouldn't sell it me, so I've got .org. A lot of my work is not for profit. So the Happy Planet Index and all of that, and then I have the business too. Yeah,
and the TED Talk, which has got close to 2.7 million views right now, right?
Is that what it's up to now? Yeah, I know it's
crazy, man. 2.7
keeps ticking over, actually. But I think quite a lot of students and schools watch it because it's sort of got an appeal to economics and about it, because it's about measurement. So it was quite a honor and quite a stress to do a TED Talk.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. It's a lot of prep and delivery, right?
Yeah.
All right. Last question of the interview is: what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
So I think to be better humans tomorrow, reach out to somebody that you really like but you haven't done for a long time, that you're overdue, or maybe you've avoided them because you forgot to say thank you, you forgot to say something. But reach out to them, reconnect with them, because saying hello again to old friends is really, really important. You've got your new friends, you'll have your friends by geography, you've met new friends no doubt in Costa Rica, but who haven't you spoken to as an old friend for a long time? You got someone in mind straight away?
Yeah. And it's funny, I'm smiling because I recommend for people to do this a lot, right? Which is, be aware of the friends that like you've picked up along the way because of what you just described, environments or geography, but be aware of the friends that like, you haven't spoken to in a while, and give them a call and say hello, and don't send a text message, pick up the phone and just be like, hey, I was thinking about you, wanted to say hi. Right?
Yeah. My wife is so good about this. She's got friends from when she was 7, 8, She's got a gang of 4 or 5 of them, and you know, they're in their early 50s now, and you know, they had a weekend together earlier this year, and I was sent out of the house. I was not allowed to be here. No way, you know. And I did get to see them all, like on the Sunday afternoon when I came back, and I was very jealous. I don't have that group of friendships from that age, but I've got some friends from childhood, but not a gang. Yeah. And you know, that's a lovely thing in her life. Yeah.
I don't either, because I moved, right? We were from South Africa to Canada, and then, you know, I was all over the place. So I never grew up consistently with a group of kids, right? Or a group of guys. So I relate to what you just said, right?
Yeah.
All right, to the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Go and check out Nic Marks. We're going to have all of your websites and your links, including your LinkedIn, in the show notes. So go and follow Nic on LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing your book come out soon. And thanks for taking the time, man. Today was an awesome conversation.
Thanks so much, Greg. Thank you.
All right, to the audience, we'll see you next week. Stay happy, stay healthy.